Hey everybody, this is Norm from Tested, and this week's episode of This Is Only a Test, it's sponsored by Telecommunication Systems Cloud Messaging Center. Imagine being able to message anywhere in the world using your own system, application, or website. Telecommunication Systems Cloud Messaging Center allows you to do just that, as well as receive delivery receipts, create contacts and groups, schedule deliveries of messages, create and view reports, and more. Go to cloudmessaging.guru, that's .guru, to sign up for the CMC REST API. In just a few easy lines of code, let Telecommunication Systems Cloud Messaging Center incorporate worldwide messaging functions into your business. And thank them for sponsoring this week's episode of This Is Only a Test. And now, on with the show. Hey, let's start a show. For November 19th, 2015, this is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Hey everybody, it's Norm here, hosting This Is Only a Test, and I'm joined this week by Jeremy Williams.
Greetings.
And Patrick Norton.
Hey everybody.
Thank you guys for coming in early this week, early on a Thursday, so everyone out there can have the podcast this Thursday. Now, Jeremy, I know you were running the control board back there, pressing that all-important fade-in button, and I think we are currently faded in. Would you call that a successful launch?
We'll see, right? As far as I can tell. Can you tell?
I can tell so far.
I'm feeling good.
I heard the soundboard operating perfectly before the show.
Yep, soundboard was working before the show. We got audio out. Like we said, every episode, every recording, every beginning of recording is like a rocket launch for us right now. We are 1968 NASA figuring out Apollo 10 and how to get things right. And I can tell you already, we didn't have a perfect launch today.
What?
I didn't get to press one button until after it started. And all it means is that everyone out there gets the podcast maybe an hour after I originally wanted them to get it.
Okay.
That's
Should
okay.
we restart? Will that save us like 45 minutes?
No.
All right.
It was too good of a start.
Doing it live.
Yeah. I think the video looks good. The video looks good. Audio is going to be fine. And how are you guys doing this week?
Patrick?
I'm good. Exciting morning. Traffic, mayhem. Nothing compared to the nightmare that went down in Paris last week.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that there was some crazy stuff happening in the world. There were terror attacks, as everyone knows, in Paris last Friday. And we're like in the thick of it right now. People are still figuring out what's happening. Just this morning, I think I was listening to the radio, and there was a raid yesterday that they announced where they got who they think was the mastermind behind it.
France confirms, front page of the Washington Post, France confirms alleged leader of attacks killed in raid, or at least one of the primary planners. A second planner, they're not sure if he was in the building or somewhere else at the time. France is pissed.
Yeah, I mean,
well
the
it
whole
should
world's
be.
kind of pissed. And, I mean, from our perspective, it seems far away, but it also seems so close. It because of the way we're all interconnected and the images coming out. And, just like last week, we talked about how phenomena that happens in one part of the world can immediately be resonates and felt in other parts because of social media. This was an immediate worldwide impact.
Yes. And it's been interesting to watch some of the news cycle is so fast that it's like terrible tragedy, and then 24 hours later, and everybody's like, oh, Facebook turned on the, are they safe thing that they put together for the natural disasters, and this is the first time they've done it, and then there's like a college professor on NPR who's like, wow, it's an indicator that they put this on for France but had not put it on for earlier disasters, and goes a list of, I should say not disasters, terrorist acts in various countries. And it's been interesting watching, Donald Trump proved that he can be the ultimate troll on Friday night. I'm not even going to get into that right now.
Oh, my God.
And it's at this point, it's like I'm half like marveled at how extraordinary social media is and the outpouring and like being able to raise funds and motivate people. And then the other half is like the amount of stupid that travels at the speed of light. And then the politicians get in, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, this happened because of Snowden. And it's like, hey, they caught one of the planners because they were using an unencrypted smartphone and dumped it in a garbage can outside of the theater they shot up.
Let's be clear, though. The stupid has always been there.
Well,
stupid has always been there, regardless of now or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Every disaster. The problem with that is because of the 24-hour news cycle and because social media and media being the democratization of media, everyone seems to be on the equal footing.
Yeah.
And all the voices, stupid or proper or not, feel like they have equal footing, and the media then doesn't do its job and doesn't parse through it and treats everyone as equal. And so it's just about how loud people can get. There were some interesting things on the tech side, and I think you were starting to allude to that. Encryption. Encryption is a huge deal. It's becoming a huge topic. It's becoming this big platform for people, at least in the States and the U.S. government, and a lot of law enforcement agencies calling for tech companies, and they've been doing this for a while, but now using this event to call tech companies and point a finger at them and say, hey, you guys have, the encryption is what caused this, or encryption gave these terrorists the abilities to do this, which is turning out maybe not to be the case, but they're making it a huge platform.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interviews with Pavel Durov, who's the founder and the CEO at Telegram Messenger, which is an encrypted communications tool. It's, in the lead quote, it's like Pavel Durov knew his terrorists were using his app to communicate, and he decided it was something he could live with. And this has always been, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about encryption, privacy, First Amendment, Second Amendment, religious freedoms. I mean, all the classic Bill of Rights stuff. This has always been like, are these rights absolute? Do you pursue this to the ultimate end, or do you compromise in the name of safety? And that's where it gets interesting because, according to one of our senators, it's okay, it's good.
Dianne Feinstein.
We should monitor every single American's telephone communications to make sure we're all safer.
Well, you'd think that even the more progressive senators would be in favor of privacy, but they're really they're talking about government backdoors. And when we're talking about encryption, we're not talking about your messages not necessarily being secure. It's about the tech companies, the government and agencies wanting companies like Apple who run their own messaging systems, because before the government had maybe great deals with AT&T and Verizon and telecoms to go into the databases, with subpoenas and pulling out records. But when a company like Apple or Facebook runs their own messaging system that takes the place of that, you have however hundreds of million people using WeChat or whatever when Facebook owns, and iMessage taking place of SMS for many, many people. And these are systems that use end-to-end encryption, where the message is encrypted on your phone. Right. It's sent over whatever network, but it's encrypted, and then it's decrypted on the end user's phone. And there's no way to...
Well, it's the argument's starting to sound like it was over PGP, which was like 25 years ago, where, encryption was still classified as a munition, and that same conversation came up, well, you don't really need encryption. No, see, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't need encryption.
Yeah, and thankfully, a lot of the tech companies have been spending a lot of time and effort just advocating for privacy. I think the EFF was on the radio this morning, and some great great commentary. I think TechCrunch did a really good piece on it. The local radio station KQED, they do a morning interview show called Forum, and they interviewed the EFF this morning about this very topic. So definitely check that out. I mean, from a user perspective, it's very difficult to feel the effects of legislation until they're right at your door.
Well, and it's all incredibly messy because right now we need better encryption. We need better security online. We need to, we trailed the world in chip and pin implementation in the United States and paid a fairly heavy financial cost. We continually, a friend of mine just finally got his notice from the OPM, and they're like, yeah, they took everything right down to your fingerprints, and we'll give you 3 years of online monitoring. And it's like, he's like, every single bit of his personal information, which was incredibly dense because of the security clearance he had to go through, is now in the possession of foreign nationals, and is also probably now going to start showing up on the internet. And he's basically been told, like, well, we'll give you a Band-Aid for 3 years, and then for the rest of your life, your financial future and your personal security is your own problem. And it's like, that's nuts.
Patrick, what are your thoughts on a service like TSA Pre? Regardless of how much it costs, because it really is like a money-making scam that the government will, and for people who don't know, TSA Pre is a system in America where because you have to go through TSA security checks, and after 9/11, the whole building of the TSA security system at airports has been incredibly inconvenient, and so to ease that,
it's really good theater. We spent a lot of money and made things complicated, and we kind of maybe sort of made some flights safer.
It's maybe the most effective and expensive piece of performance art ever done.
Absolutely.
And institutionalized by any government ever. And all it's done for people, travelers, is create this expectation of incredible delays in getting on board your plane. So there's a new system, we've talked about this before, that I think came up about 2 years ago called TSA Pre, and they've been implementing it in airports. It's a lot like that private company Clear, where you used to pay for a service and you could bypass the security check or be pre-approved. The government has the system now, and you pay, I believe it's like $80 for 2 years.
No, I think it's longer than that.
5 years?
Maybe 5 years.
5 years, $80. You go into an office, make an appointment, and they scan your fingerprint, fill out a form. I'm not sure if they even take your photo there. But once you get your pre-approval number and you buy a plane ticket with that number, you can then pass the TSA line and go into the much faster TSA Pre, more convenient line.
Yeah, like no need to remove shoes, laptops, 311 liquids, belts, or light jackets.
Now, I like the service because it's convenient.
Sure. You travel constantly.
I travel a lot. It's a huge convenience to me, but you're paying to cut the line. You're paying to cut the line. You're paying to avoid the theater, which is really not super effective.
I don't know, man. It's only $85, and compare that to the cost of your airline tickets over the length of 5 years. It's not that much money.
But my point is, regardless of the cost, what do you think about them having this kind of personal information?
They already have an astounding amount of personal information when you book a flight, unless you're faking your information, in which case you're either more privacy conscious than I am, or you have issues, right? It is a convenience for business travelers that are tired of looking at, because it's like, I always laugh because I don't travel nearly as much as I used to, but it's still always this wonderful chance to observe humanity at its worst, where it's like, you got to take your shoes off. Oh, you got to take your laptop out. Oh, you got to, you have to do all this stuff. And for a while, for like a couple years, it was different at almost every airport, which was immensely frustrating. But at this point, it's pretty standard.
It's pretty standard. It's also amazing every time I see someone who just doesn't, like, by now you must know the process. And there are some people who just don't know the process.
What do you mean I can't take my 2-liter Gatorade bottle on the plane?
Like, haven't flown in the past 10 years?
Or
I'm amazed that they haven't done ways to socially engineer the line to at least make it more, have the time pass by a little quicker.
There was a wonderful article by a retired police chief or assistant police chief who was essentially a middle-aged woman and realized that she was effectively being profiled for secondary inspections because she looked like the kind of woman who would meekly go through secondary inspections and not complain and make the life of the TSA agents. And she started collecting information and she started researching it. She realized that a lot of the things that fundamentally changed and improved law enforcement in the last 30 years, such as actually cataloging contacts and keeping information and statistics and stuff, are not actually collected by the TSA. So there's an entire learning aspect of what's going on that doesn't exist there. There's, they're underpaid, they're undertrained. They're dealing with people pretty much at their worst, which is trying to, get onto an airline, whether because they're late for a business appointment or because they're trying to get to Tahiti or whatever that is. The system's complicated and messy, and if you got $85, you can bypass the entire thing, which is probably the bargain of a lifetime, unless you're trying to travel with children.
You do have to trade your fingerprints, though. I don't know. Have you signed up for it? Because
No.
I just went, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. I got my appointment, and they make you put on both hands, like your full fingerprints.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, don't worry.
In the system.
It's the government. They're secure.
Yeah, but they didn't have them before because I don't have a criminal record.
Well,
So now they
or you
do.
haven't been a teacher or a member of the armed forces
Right,
or a
exactly.
police officer.
That's
There's,
right.
there's a lot of legitimate reasons that they collect your fingerprints that do not mean you're a criminal.
No, this is true.
But the I mean it's kind of it's like enshrined in a little manila folder in black and white are your fingerprints,
And those
somewhere in
fingerprints could be
Washington.
sent to the CNC machines to generate fake thumbs for when they need to unlock your phone.
Well, that's where that's where it gets really. I mean, that's where it gets really curious, because when you start reading about biometric security, there's this really interesting mixture of incredibly enthusiastic corporations trying to sell biometric machinery, security researchers that are like, well, you could do worse, and security researchers that are like, well, this is already profoundly flawed, don't bother.
It's the biometric security. The security part is a misnomer. It's
Right.
more about biometric
Passwords.
passwords, which
bypassing.
can be split into two categories: one,
Right.
actual encryption and security, and one is just a mere like your front door lock, a
Right.
deterrent. And it's more about biometric security in terms of the deterrence. That's what Apple. That's where your Touch ID actually
Sure.
is. You're not encrypting and locking your phone. What you're doing is, it's their front door bolt. You
Right.
know, if the criminal really wanted to get in there, there are ways to get in there.
Well, most criminals just kick the back door
Exactly.
during daylight hours
Right.
and they grab the easily fensible stuff.
But if you turn on someone's phone and you see that you need the Touch ID, then it's a deterrent.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, like, TSA Pre is going to do great until someone who's not on any no-fly list, not on anybody's radar, and got recruited over, Facebook or a website or a forum or whatever profoundly irritating thing that ISIS is doing. And when I say profoundly irritating, I'm not even begin to express my disgust and rage at terrorism. So don't email and be angry, because I'm not angry enough. Trust me. I went to school 2 blocks from the trade towers. A friend of mine had 27 of his classmates from high school in the building. Like, I'm there. But the TSA Pre is going to be fine until somebody who's has no reason for suspicion takes advantage of that to smuggle something we don't want on a plane, right? And then there's going to be this uproar, like, how could we have let people, like right after 9/11, people are allowed on planes with pocket knives? I can't. Like, look, I can give everybody in this room a pocket knife and tell all of you to kill me, and I guarantee you not a one of you is going to do it, because you don't have the motivation, you don't have the desire, you don't have the training. But
You don't have the training. I love
well,
Sounds like Dwight Schrute, right?
it. Yes.
well, but I mean, you think about it, like, people, the average number of shots fired in an NYPD altercation is what, like 4,000 per officer. They had an incident where dozens of shots were fired. These are trained professionals who are in the police force, and are required to qualify. And when things get hairy, life doesn't necessarily work out the way it's supposed to. And that's one of the fundamental things we're battling right here, is the people who believe that, well, we're going to pass laws and make everybody safe. We're going to watch everything you do. And you know what? While we're in there, did you just download that from that website? Let me just send that over to our friends over at the other side of the office, because this is Homeland Security, and I'm not sure you were supposed to download that. You know what I mean? Like, once we get a good, patient culture of total observation, we'll make everybody safe. And guess what? Nobody's ever managed to legislate total safety, because people suck and they do terrible things.
Yes.
Now that I've taken the podcast completely down to the floor.
Hey, let's talk about the serious stuff then. Let's talk about the biggest piece of technology news this week. Oxford English Dictionaries word of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Dun,
The
dun, dun.
word of the year, which I can't even say out loud
Why not?
because it's not a word.
It is now.
It is an emoji.
Oh, yeah.
Oxford Dictionaries, which, to be clear, because I know people have blown this far out of proportion already, it's their blog.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of the Oxford University Press, but it's still the same organization.
What? It's not added to the dictionary?
I think it's actually been in the dictionary for a long time. It's just its use has
they're just
exploded.
celebrating the word.
Yes.
Right.
They're celebrating the word of 2015 is the crying emoji.
Yeah.
Is it that one?
This year, Oxford University Press have partnered with leading mobile technology business SwiftKeys to explore frequency and usage statistics for some of the most popular emoji across the world, and crying laughing was chosen because it was the most used emoji globally in 2015.
Wait.
Wow.
Is it crying laughing or is it face with tears of joy?
Yeah.
Face with tears
Yours
of joy.
is probably the correct description.
But it's a pictograph, and I'm sure I didn't know that's what this one was called. I don't even know how to type out. Is this a pictograph where you could like a emoticon where you can type out the ASCII and then it converts to that?
What are you talking about?
You know,
He's going old school on you.
emoji is
They
just
used to be-
a derivative of emoticon,
Yeah.
and emoticons are
ASCII characters.
ASCII characters.
Yeah.
So is there an ASCII equivalent to this?
Oh, I see. Yeah. That would be the
Colon.
followed by an apostrophe.
Colon apostrophe.
Yeah, that one,
and
that's a
parentheses?
single tier.
But
and
this
then
is double
parentheses.
tier.
I know. That's hard.
I don't know. I'm
Oh,
so
look.
confused.
Emojibase.com. You can cut and paste.
So
This is
while
insane.
you're gonna reverse, you're gonna translate. You're gonna emoji translate. It's like Babelfish for emoji.
I'm sorry. I'm like, oh, there's the Unicode version, Unicode hex, HTML decimal entry, the hex entry test, and the short code.
Oh my goodness. So importantly here, I mean, yes, emoji hugely prevalent in 2015. Everyone's using it. Whatever. I think there's calling to attention, cultural shifts. Don't take it too
It
seriously.
used to be locked on iPhones, you know. It used to be only available in the maybe the Japanese
You'd have to use an
character set?
international. You have to download a second international, enable a bilingual keyboard where
Exactly.
you press the global icon
Right.
to enable it, and then there would be language packs that you would download. But now, of course, it's everywhere; it's built in. But here are the other Oxford English Dictionaries blogs choices, the runners-up for 2015 Word of the Year. You have ad blocker, a noun, not ad hyphen blocker, it's just ad space blocker. Interesting. Brexit.
What?
I've never heard of that. A term for the potential or hypothetical departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union. So maybe that's more of an international phrase.
Seems like a Great Brittany kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna threaten with that Brexit. Sounds like breakfast. Dark web, which relevant to us. I mean,
Sure.
I don't know if it's definitely. There was a lot of stories about dark web, but I don't feel like 2015 was especially notable about media coverage or cultural usage or awareness of the dark web. On Fleek, I could have seen that happening on Fleek. Something I learned about on this very podcast. I think Gary and Will explained the phrase "on Fleek" to me.
Popularized in a 2014 video post on the social media service Vine by Kayla Newman.
Oh, this is new. I've never heard of this word before. Lumbersexual.
Actually, I heard about that the first time a few years ago.
Lumbersexual.
Remember when you see all those guys with beards and meticulously maintained vintage
Baristas.
Pendleton? Well, imagine Will, but
Okay.
wearing like $4,000 worth of Pendleton wool stuff he got off of Etsy. That's lumbersexual.
Northwest America.
Well, it's mostly though. If you wander the streets of San Francisco now, there's thousands of keyboard jockeys who have never actually touched a tool other than a keyboard, who are dressing like they were basically working in Eastern Oregon.
So
plaid flannel.
Yeah.
And
so it's
the beard.
it's
Yeah.
not about people who actually are from those parts of the country,
No.
but it's all about people in the cities
Yeah.
who dressed that way, who wear the over expensive plaid.
My loose understanding is Portland is a collecting point for weirdness in Oregon, which means
Okay.
a lot of people who grew up in the lumberjacky regions or the what do you call it, the ranch areas in Eastern Oregon, they all descend on Portland, and they all have their sort of clothes that they brought with them, and then those clothes, because they're actually in many ways indestructible and practical, became absorbed by the general population, which then influenced Brooklyn, which then influenced the rest of the nation, with the basically butch I work outdoors. I mean, Best Made Company. You ever seen that?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, we're in Brooklyn. We make unbelievably cool axes with painted
Everything's
handles
handcrafted.
that you
Let me
can-
show you my Vimeo video.
I mean, they literally they have an
Rack
axe
focus, rack
harness.
focus.
Like, I've never met anyone who ever carried an axe on a harness, but Best Made Company sells them. So apparently, there's kids in Brooklyn wandering around carrying their axes.
Bespoke, all-American, handmade, handcrafted, new American manufacturing.
I love me a good tool, but sometimes this stuff makes me giggle.
Refugee.
I think
that gets listed after lumbersexual.
I don't think the order really mattered here.
Right.
I think it's
They're
actually
in
an
alphabetical
alphabetical order
Oh,
listed
that's
here.
why.
Refugee, absolutely, as a cultural something in the news, but I probably omitted because as it's an idea. I don't think it's anything new. I mean, there are a lot of things, memes that happened in 2015. Sharing economy, I think maybe 1 year too late.
It's not anything new. It's just people actually started paying attention to it for the first time in like 40 years.
I disagree. I think it's not even. I think that the paying attention is just another way of saying that. So again, social media has raised the awareness of everything, and there's heightened awareness of every meme.
At least for several minutes.
Yeah. Exactly, for several minutes. Yeah. So sharing economy. I think 1 year too late for that.
Have you seen the lobby for the Airbnb building? Wow, I want to work there.
It's all that money for that building and those ads. Those Muni ads about library tax fund. This is the word they as singular pronoun used to refer to a person of unspecified sex. So this is more about the PC.
This is interesting because when I was in college, my English professor said you must use he or she, but he thought in the future they would be embraced as a singular pronoun.
And you think 2015 is one?
Well, according to Oxford, it is.
I think there needs to be a new word other than they. They is too weird. They is for multiple.
Having grown up in parts of the culture and parts of the English majory field where you were exploring all of those alternatives, they is actually a lot more practical.
Really?
But it carries a lot of emotional baggage and complications that I won't even begin to get. Even I, the king of the rat hole, will not go near on the podcast. But they functions a lot better than a lot of the alternatives.
Is there an alternative? What's an example?
Don't.
Oh, sorry.
Walk away. Walk away, man.
All right. So really, that was not really the big tech nukes of this week. So hold on. Let's go one level back up. Kind of unexpectedly, Rdio, the music streaming service, announced that it would be filing for bankruptcy or at least dissolving its service, and it sold much of its assets to Pandora.
How about that?
How about that?
Full disclosure, you have some roots at Pandora, don't you?
I used to work at Pandora out of college. That was one of my first jobs out of college was in Pandora when it first started up.
That was a while ago. They were hot then. Ago. I mean, that was the service.
Pre-IPO.
Yeah.
And Pandora, I mean, if you follow, and Patrick, I'd love to hear, get more context on music streaming on the internet. Let's work backwards, because I think that's probably an easy way to work to go through it. Let me apologize for audios. Okay. Right now, there's the dominant form of music streaming is subscription-based services. You have things like Beats Music also being faded out because it's Apple Music now. So Apple Music, Spotify, I think doing pretty well, and who are the big alternatives? There's Tidal, which just launched the high-end streaming service. And then is that it? And then I guess Amazon. You can consider Amazon Prime because it's
Apple
built
Music.
in.
Rdio was the other big one.
So if you move back from like the top two or three right now, it's kind of like Spotify and Apple.
Last FM, I guess, would be another one.
I think, and then you move back from that, you have back 3 years ago, let's say, it was Spotify and Rdio. Rdio had a huge marketing campaign. Rdio and Spotify kind of both rose at the same time as what was new for them was they wanted to charge you $15 a month for streaming. And before Rdio and Spotify, if we go backward one level again, was actually Last.fm, Pandora, and sites like Grooveshark, where it was all based on radio-based streaming. You'd listen to ads, and you could not pick the music you wanted to listen to. Yeah. And the way the licensing worked for those services and the way they made money and one of the reasons it was so challenging for sites like Pandora and Grooveshark, which I don't think exists anymore much, was that they paid their licensing fees, if they ever did, through Sound Exchange, through intermediate. It was part of the DMCA, which had the provisions that enabled for digital radio stations to stream music and then pay. You have to, if you were going to stream music to listeners, you have to then catalog exactly what every listener was listening to, and then they would tally up how much that would be per song. Then that would be paid to an intermediate service, a middleman that the government set up, Sound Exchange. And Sound Exchange, which artists registered with, would then mail out checks to individual artists. That's an incredibly tough business to be in because the rates that the DMCA provided and Sound Exchange were very high. It was like a zero margin business. The $15 and it was all advertising based, right? So it's all your classic CPM, how many per listens, and whether it was McDonald's or whoever would buy an ad, you pay an ad. And the user experience, well, it was more akin to terrestrial radio, where you just flip on a station, maybe create your own station. You couldn't choose the music. You couldn't download anything. No local syncing, no mobile playing for a long time.
If you wanted to hear an artist, you could see the station with an artist.
Yes.
And you got maybe one track from who you wanted to hear something from.
And that was
and then that's it.
Right.
That was the innovation of Pandora, because what they did was they built what they called the Music Genome Project, which is really just a taxonomy of music. They looked at the breadth of popular music, everything I think but classical to start, because that was very difficult to, and then they identified dozens of attributes, and they had people with music degrees sit down and listen to each song and rate each song based on the attributes. So they would listen to a new song or an old song, and they would be through the indexing of these songs find ties and relationships and links. So when you created a radio station, if you wanted to say, I want to listen to, let's say, U2, right? I like this song from U2, this particular song or this band. They would aggregate all the data about that song or that band and then create dynamically a station. And that way, it would programmatically make music more catered to you. Very smart. Last FM did a very similar thing, except instead of using a more scientific taxonomy approach, it was all just user-based listening. If someone liked this song and they looked at the data, it was all data aggregation. If a lot of people would listen to this song, then listen to this song next, then they generated in the background a playlist. And the reason these playlists needed to be generated was because the licensing that they were using didn't allow for users to create their own playlists. You couldn't do that because otherwise you just pick your song. It would be free play. It wouldn't be radio. Spotify and Rdio were business models where they didn't work through SoundCloud. They worked with direct relationships with music, with the licensor holders, with every different label, they would have a different relationship, pay a different rate, which was probably lower in aggregate than what Pandora was paying. And then they also started with the model where they wanted people to pay first and then introduce a radio model later. So the expectation from the user was Spotify was never a free service.
Right.
It was you pay $5 a month to listen on your desktop. You pay more if you want to listen on mobile. And then they've built this huge user base. And Rdio tried to do the same thing. If you look at, like, are you guys both Spotify subscribers?
No.
I've been a Spotify. Jeremy, were you an Rdio subscriber? Yeah. If you look at your billing and how long, because I think I've been a subscriber to Spotify since the very beginning. I've spent several $100s. And if you break that down to $10 an album, I don't know if I've bought that many albums, but I don't feel bad that I've spent that money because I've listened to a lot of things I wouldn't have otherwise listened to once, and it's kind of built like Netflix, built into my mind as a sunk cost every month or every year. Pandora, it's a little tougher business because they also had a subscription-based business, but I think it's really tough to move from a free model to a paid model. And then in the paid model, people really only pick one or the other. So you pick Spotify, you pick Rdio, or now you pick Apple Music,
or Tidal,
or Tidal if you believe in the higher quality, the higher bitrate music. Amazon, I think, gets away with it because they bundle like their video streaming service with Prime delivery. It's kind of a Trojan horse service that you're like, oh, okay, I'll continue paying for that one. I don't feel like I'm getting ripped off because I'm really paying for delivery, and then the music is tied to that. And then if you go back before Pandora and before Last FM, it was Shoutcast. It was user-hosted radio streaming. Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, or ICE or some of the other stuff. I mean, all of a sudden we're going back to like Winamp and Shoutcast.
It really kicks the llama's ass.
Oh God, I was gonna say that, but I was restraining myself.
Yeah, Patrick, I'll let you take care of that for a second. There are children's in the office. I don't think that it's surprising that Rdio went away. I think that in terms of music, if you look at video streaming, where there's a Netflix, there's Hulu, there's Amazon, there's HBO, which you can with HBO now you can subscribe to that separately. Those companies are all surviving because they're not. It's not one or the other services. They're trying to build a market where you have to subscribe to all of them if you want the breadth of content.
I mean, we're at the point where things are getting about to get really messy in the video market, right? Because first there was Netflix, and Netflix had a couple of really interesting agreements that gave them access to huge catalogs that weren't available. Yeah, thanks Stars, and then later on Epix. And now, both of those agreements have lapsed, and Netflix has moved on to what it considers a much smarter model, which is having premium content that people will pay for to have Netflix. And they still do a lot of other stuff, but until the Disney deal launches next year, there's kind of this dearth. They're in this weird place where there's some good movies and there's a lot of crap, and it's like, well, at least there's tons of documentaries. Hulu's in a position where a lot of its sort of partners are starting to look around and going like, oh wow, why don't we have our own CBS site? How do we develop CBS? How do we collect all of the money instead of some of the money, right? And part of that's going to be the launch of the new Star Trek series, and they're like, well, we'll do a teaser on broadcast or in cable, and then we'll make people subscribe to the website to get all of the content. And that whole, it seems like the entire video industry is about to diaspora as the broadcast networks realize that what they couldn't effectively do 5 or 10 years ago, they can more effectively do now if they just pull their content from Hulu or somewhere else. And we can also get into the arguments about Amazon, refusing to sell the Chromecast and the Apple TV.
And putting their apps in the other devices.
Yeah, well, as far as we know, Apple still hasn't received an Amazon app for the Apple TV, which is a shame. It would be nice to have it there. But the
hardware issue is a separate thing.
The hardware issue is a separate thing.
Even the licensing.
Right.
I mean, I don't believe, and Netflix and Hulu are definitely moving away from that model of this is the one bucket you need. It's not about being that one bucket.
Well, they can't afford to be the one bucket because
can't.
All the people supplying the stuff to go to the buckets.
They're creating their own buckets.
Yeah, they're creating their own buckets. But to bring this back to the radio stuff, that whole scene's getting messier and messier because, Tidal, like Taylor Swift, my song was played like X number of times and I only made this much money. It's like a classic, sort of like social media theme. Don't listen to Pandora. And it's like, well, the Wesker, the founder of Pandora, who's making a lot of money over the years, his argument is like, hey, if radio stations paid the per artist rate or the per listen rate that we pay, you would make, an artist would make $1,300 every time their radio was played, their song was played on the radio, which, and it's like the rates are so crazy at this point.
And a lot of middle people.
And also there's a lot of people that still refuse to acknowledge that, hey, you signed a deal with a record company and they get most of the money. And that's the way it's been for a long time. That's not news in the recording industry.
There are people at every level, from the creation of the song to the promotion to the publishing to distribution, all the platforms that you can call that. Everyone's taking their cut. And even if you compress the platforms from artist to distribution, it's never going to, unless Taylor Swift has her own distribution service, Taylor Swift radio service, and is making enough content for that, it's not going to work out like that. And I guess you can't say that's impossible either, because who the one person who has that kind of control? J.K. Rowling, in terms of media.
It's going to be, but that's also, this has also been something that's been argued about for decades, like in the recording industry, where it's like so-and-so got their rights. Well, so-and-so is one of the greatest artists of his generation or any other generation. So he's so far off the end of the bell curve and generates so many hits, he can negotiate that contract. The
Beatles.
vast majority, the vast majority of recording artists are somewhere in the middle, and a lot of them, are either got trapped into a bad agreement by signing a letter of intent from a scumbaggy AR rep in a club at 2 a.m, or just didn't have good lawyers, or saw an opportunity to get rich. And it's that whole, this isn't getting any less messy. The lawyers aren't having any less power, and the middlemen aren't letting go of anything.
What I think is really also interesting is, as we're talking about streaming services for audio versus streaming services for video, on the user side, what you're looking for from these services are also completely different. When you're looking at music, you're looking for a service that will have the content you want, not only the new content, because there's constantly new content as of both video and audio, but also you go back and listen to the old content. On the video side, that is not necessarily the case. If you've seen a movie, if you've seen a TV show, it's okay if Netflix then loses that for some time, but all you care more about is the newer stuff. There's no Beatles catalog in video. You're not going to go to a video subscription service and say, I need this service because it has Ken Burns baseball. I do go to Netflix because it has Ken Burns baseball, but it's not like, you're looking at the canonical, it must have this library.
I wonder what a video service would cost if it had the Apple Music equivalent of the library of movies.
Well, I mean, and that's what everyone hoped for with Apple. I think with the Apple TV, one of the quote-unquote disappointments, and there are different levels of disappointment or and promise potential of Apple TV, failed potential. People are hoping for Apple to have made deals with content providers. What they've done well with Apple TV, I think, is the cross-indexing of the video content in the apps, in Netflix and in Hulu and in iTunes Store, of course. With one Siri search.
In their interface.
Right. With one Siri search, you can search across this. But what I think, and I'm sure that the API is there so that when CBS has their Star Trek show and it's in an app on Apple TV, you could also search it in.
Unless CBS decides to try to make everybody to go to cbscom.app.watchstartrek.com.
And that's one of the problems. Netflix wants you to stay in their app because they know some of the content you have there, you could otherwise, Apple would rather have you rent or buy from iTunes, and Netflix wants you to browse in their menus. They want to make their content surfaceable and searchable and accessible, but unless Apple has the Comcast equivalent relationship with all these content providers and can have the pay Apple whatever amount a month, a la carte, I don't think works as well as people think the promise of a la carte. Right. Because if you say, and I know people love, okay, we want the a la carte model. I only watch AMC and I only watch HBO. Let me just buy those two. You say that, but then you also like Hulu stuff and Amazon's exclusive, and you want to watch this, and you want to watch South Park, and you want to watch the new Ash and Eve vs. Evil Dead. It all adds up.
You're saying you end up paying about the same.
Or more. I think we're moving toward the model where the a la carte model, because everyone's making content.
Right.
Everyone is making Star Trek, CBS is Star Trek, HBO's Game of Thrones, and a ton of other shows.
There's a psychological element, though, of getting only what you want.
You think you're picking
because if you have 100 channels you never watch, you feel like you're paying for something you don't need.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but that's also what's so complicated about the cable model is most of those 300 channels you never watch actually subsidize the half dozen you do. I mean, when you look at cable, a typical person watches 4 to 6 channels. They might skim 20 channels, and they generally ignore the rest of everything else on their cable box. But when you're a big cable operator, ESPN wants like $24 a month per subscriber for ESPN. So you have a half dozen channels that are paying for carriage, and those help to subsidize. I mean, it's a big messy model.
Now, I do completely agree. Some people, I mean, it's a long tail model.
Right.
I don't think there should be a one model fits all. There should be, the a la carte works best if there are packages from small to big. If there was a unified service, and Comcast is never going to make this happen, but if there is the option, if you just want ESPN, you get Sling, or and a lot of people just want Netflix, and it's great, pay for Netflix. But I think for people who are currently paying for Comcast and enjoy the 4 or 5 channels, if you break it down separately, you're still going to be paying the same, if not amount, for a more fragmented experience.
I think it really depends on what you're watching, because we were looking at, I think the last time we had satellite or cable, we were looking at like $160 a month for the bills. And now, I mean, if you, we have internet, so I'm not going to count that 65 or $70 a month, but I think we're paying probably $30 a month for the per monthly payments for stuff we watch, and then we're buying a la carte stuff off of iTunes because we started 1,000 years ago, and we just have a ton of stuff locked up there.
And it's also, I mean, Comcast doesn't help itself with its shitty business practices.
No, Comcast. I mean, it'll be interesting. Comcast is desperate when they start offering a la carte services, or they start, because I mean it's their whole it was great on Tech Thing this week. We had talked about the data caps and the unlimited data plan, and somebody's like, you know what? That unlimited data plan, the extra $35 a month, now actually makes it less expensive for me to buy gigabit Ethernet directly from the city of Chattanooga. So unfortunately, the vast majority of us aren't going to have those options, and Comcast is going to keep beating us up in the process.
Yeah, it sucks that they also control the pipes.
Yes.
If they didn't control the pipes, they would have much less power.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this a good move by Pandora? Are they going to offer an upsell now to the paid service?
Yes, I think absolutely. I go back to the argument that it's so tough that they have this huge user base, and they want to convert the user base at least partially from free advertising-based streaming to paid-based streaming, because that's where the money's at. But
and they need money because their operating costs at Pandora are incredibly high.
Huge. They serve. I mean, it's a immeasurable portion of internet traffic is through their pipes and through their servers. It's not like I mean, maybe some of it's over AWS now and third-party data and cloud servers, but before it was like in their Oakland offices, they were serving to everyone listening to Pandora, ripping the CDs themselves.
Off of some Dell machines just hooked up to the Ethernet?
I mean, they have big server rooms, but I think regardless of whether they have the technology or not, the conversion of an audience who expects to and is accustomed to listening and enjoying a streaming service that's free and ad-based to one that's paid is it is the modern media challenge, and it doesn't just apply to audio and music streaming. It applies to text, it applies to video, and it applies to basically every form of content, YouTube included.
Wow, because there's just so much money there. Yeah. So much potential revenue.
Off of the streaming music and video topic, let's talk about Apple and design. Did you guys read this article in Fast Company written by Don Norman and Bruce Tognazini?
Nope. Tell me about it.
Fantastic piece. These two guys were both original Apple employees. I think Apple employee like number 66 or something, and founded the Human Interface Group at Apple. They have since left and run UX, and they're UX legends. They helped create the Human Interface Guidelines, I believe, at Apple. And they wrote this scathing critique of modern Apple design. A lot of it...
Is this a back in my day kind of story? Is it
No.
curmudgeons?
It's not curmudgeons. It's about people who have seen the transition of UI. It goes back to the discussion we had last week about mobile versus desktop, cursor-based systems and tiled window systems versus a touch-based paradigm. And as Apple has basically two operating systems in the wild now, Mac OS and iOS, the interface guidelines for both, they shift.
Right.
And it's more of a critique of iOS, but basically the interface guidelines for iOS now omit many of the basic tenets of good design in their minds, human interface design of macOS. It's beautiful, but a lot of the ease of access, discoverability, usability is gone for the sake of ease of access, for beauty. And it goes into a really good detail about looking at the human interface design principles, this transition from what it was in 1995 to 2008, 2015, and now between OS 10 and iOS. And the lessons of iOS, you see this list of what's kind of essential in in UI design and UX design. It's shrunken not only for iOS, but in OS 10 as well. You lose a lot of things. A lot of important things. I mean, I think the complexity of iOS needed to be simple to start. There's no doubt about that. It was a new thing.
Yeah.
Touch interfaces were new. The screens were smaller. The way we implement, the way Apple and developers, first web apps and then native apps, implemented interface within their apps and also on the main home screen, need to be simple because it was a new language and people would learn it fast. I mean, it's native for kids these days. But as iOS increases in complexity and its functionality, things like the iPad Pro, the things you're able to do now with it, I think, really fall short of its potential because of its guidelines.
I certainly can relate to the interface getting complex. I think that's a real problem for anyone who's new to iOS. There's probably features they don't even know exist yet, having used the phone for months.
Yeah. And it's not discoverable.
Does the article reflect on Android at all?
No, it's primarily a critique of Apple.
Okay.
Well, this is also, I mean, when the OS 10 came out, there was a lot of traditional, old school Mac designers that went berserk because there used to be literally like a yard and a half of manuals that basically outlined everything inside the Macintosh design Bible, and if you broke those, your users beat on you and Apple beat on you. Then OS 10 came out, and it was really this dog's breakfast of mismatching things. I mean, from the underlying standpoint, it was magnificent engineering, but from an interface standpoint, it was a radical step back in terms of consistency and enforcement. I'm going way back to the introduction of OS 10 with this, and this is just, these guys are just, it's interesting that now they're saying like it's no longer about simple design elements, but around the entire approach to the operating system, where they're so desperate to make it simple, they've made it more complex again.
Apple has really championed the idea of simplicity is better. Simplicity is good design. And it's not, those things aren't absolutely tied together. Just because something is complex doesn't mean it can't be good design. It just has to be designed well.
Right.
And I think when you're asking about Android, they did mention Android. I think the biggest difference, early Android and even Android now and some of iOS 9 now, is the back functionality, which Apple has integrated in iOS 9, some contextual on-screen back button, which feels, I mean, it works, but it does feel a little shoehorned in. But they started iOS with no back functionality. It was just to go home I think it was bad design. It's one of the reasons I think Apple, and on Android and the back button on Windows Phone aren't perfect, weren't perfect, and still aren't perfect, but it's the way people think about how they interface. It's a linear way of interfacing with the device. And I think Apple has acknowledged that with that back functionality now on iOS. You can see when you click from one app to another, there's in the top left-hand corner, the back button, back to this specific thing. But for the first 8 versions of iOS, they didn't have that. Yeah. And app developers had to accommodate for that, had to build their apps with that in mind, without that functionality in mind, and make things either take away features or make things more simple, so to accommodate that.
I mean, it's funny, they actually call out Android for having a back button from the original versions.
Who did? Apple did?
No, the people reviewing the article actually call out Android for having the good sense to put a back button everywhere and universally available. They're basically, they talk about Google Maps becoming more attractive and more confusing. And it's funny, like Microsoft's Windows 8 is actually a clever and intelligent design for gestural devices, solving many of the problems we have just described, but fails to integrate the different operation style required of desktop machines intended for productive work. It's a curious article because I think they're just really pissed that Apple lost the way.
Well, I don't think it's so much lost the way, but maybe got so clouded with this idea of beauty and simplicity, and that being a huge selling point, is that they champion that at the expense of usability, and they hide and omit the opportunity to develop and design for complexity, which is a good thing for users, especially when you're talking about things like the iPad Pro, where they're championing the ability to do actual productive work on it.
Right.
It's going to be tough for app developers to get out of that mindset.
Right.
When and yes, users respond to beauty and simplicity, and it has allowed iOS to be adopted worldwide and been so successful. But you have to let go of some of those tenets and go back to the original design principles that you set out, and not feel like because things need to be beautiful, they also can't be complex and they can't be discoverable, and you can't have the old models of design.
Yeah, I mean, they're also calling out like Johnny Ives and Steve. I mean, because they get into the whole sort of Dieter Rams design principles. I mean, the missing principles, discoverability, feedback, recovery, consistency, the encouragement of growth. I mean, that's a pretty huge indictment over the overall operating system. But they're very like, quote, many of the worst of Apple's hidden principles are often excused by claiming that Apple is only following the teachings of famous German designer Dieter Rams, who for many years was responsible basically for Braun, all these incredible radical change in interface design on physical devices. They specifically cite the 10th principle: good design is as little design as possible. But note, the authors say, that this is his 10th principle, not his first. I think they're really pissed that they went for pretty and simple over making it usable.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, and in usability, I mean, last week we talked about the iPad Pro, which we're still currently testing, and the idea that Apple is positioning it as a device that could, for some people, replace a laptop. I don't disagree. I think for some people, the functionality and having used the iPad Pro with a keyboard for a week and a half now, it definitely, in some ways, can replace the functionality of a laptop. Not everything.
That's practically a glowing endorsement.
Yeah, I mean, I think Apple wants to sell you two devices. At least two devices, three devices, ideally.
If they want to sell, well, I don't understand how the Pro fits. The Pro just seems like a half-assed attempt to do something.
I don't think it's a half-assed attempt. It is a smart attempt to sell the people who have the money and who are foolish enough with the disposable income to buy everything in the ecosystem.
I don't know. I feel like the Pro is being positioned, at least in terms by the media, as another alternative for everyone, and it's not.
It's not.
I think it's great for artists. It's great for people who are going to use the stylus professionally, or even as a hobby. But other than that, I don't see why it's being marketed to everybody.
The media's perception, not just on Apple, but for everyone, other companies as well, of a one device, the golden device that fits all. Every product needs to be a golden device, is terrible.
Right.
And writing their stories and reviews that way is very misleading. It happened with the Microsoft Surface. Now, Microsoft did make mistakes when they announced the first Surface because it looked like a tablet because it didn't have the keyboard, but it was fat. And when people reviewed that first Surface, they compared it to the iPad. Like, oh my God, it's so much fatter and worse battery life than that. The Surface is not a tablet. The Surface is a laptop that doesn't have a keyboard that you can buy an optional keyboard.
Right.
And even Microsoft's current tagline for the Surface, the tablet that can replace your laptop, it's their fault as well to mislead. I think it goes back to consumers don't want to think like they have to buy so many devices, and Microsoft has done a good job of selling one device that can maybe cover many, like 80% of the needs of a laptop and maybe 50-60% of the needs of a tablet user, right, with the Surface, which is good enough for a lot of people. Apple very clearly wants to sell you a MacBook or an iMac, like a Mac OS device, an iPhone for sure,
a watch.
and then a watch. That's right, and then also an iPad.
And this Christmas, a watch charger.
And this Christmas, a magnetic watch charger. Tim Cook said they will not make a converged iPad and Mac device. We've speculated, and this what he really means is they won't combine Mac OS with iOS.
They absolutely won't until they do.
I think we're both on the same side of this fence. Like,
You think they will?
Yeah.
Well, the first step to that would be turning Mac OS, porting it to ARM. So that would be signifier one.
They already have an iOS simulator in OS 10. All you have to do is download Xcode, and you get access to it.
Right.
So they could run iOS apps on OS 10 pretty simply. I mean, I imagine they would have to put some engineering behind it, spend a year getting it right.
Yeah.
But they could do it.
Never say never. Always the thing with Apple. When they say never, what they really mean is not right now. And how you should interpret that, how users should interpret that, is why not right now. One, is it a money-making scheme? Is it because they want to saturate the market with these new models of usage first? Two, is the tech not ready yet? And for example, Mac OS not being ARM native, absolutely, tech isn't ready yet.
Right.
Three, is the usability case not figured out yet? So right now, people use Mac OS devices with keyboards, with mice, cursors. It's a cursor-based tiled window system. iOS, even with multitasking, isn't that yet. So software isn't that yet.
And accelerometer plays a big role in a lot of apps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if Mac OS had perfect ARM support, if the hardware was fast enough, which increasingly ARM is getting better, the form factors can get there, battery life can get there, and if the software, if Mac OS gets better, it gets touch support, period, and iOS gets better multitasking, then absolutely I could see one converged device in the future. But there's so many steps to get there. And right now there's so much money to be made in each of those steps to get there that, I don't, it's nowhere in the near future.
Right.
I mean, when Tim Cook says they won't make a converged iPad Mac device,
Right.
what he really means is don't hold your breath for it now because we want your money while you're holding your breath.
Part of it's funny because the article that this was pulled from comes from the Independent in Ireland, and the reporter is basically like, okay, so how long is it before you guys stop making Macs, MacBooks and desktop Macs, and he was like, no, why would you buy a PC? I mean, I understand why you would buy a Mac or a Mac Pro, but why would you buy it's so much quote.
It's a terrible question to ask because what is the point of asking that question?
Right.
Like
To
if
a CEO?
To a CEO, you're basically asking them like, okay, from a financial perspective, is this market how's your business going to change?
Right.
And which one, it's not his role to tell you their future roadmap plans right now. Two, from a usability perspective, it's pointless because the software isn't there.
Right.
Like unless their software was there right now, and we had Photoshop, we had perfect video editing tools and productivity tools on iOS, that question is completely moot. Like, of course, people are going to still use Mac OS and desktop class devices and cursor-based tiled Windows systems. Of course, Apple's going to make those. Like, that's where people are using them now.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
maybe the markets are, maybe there's going to be a shift, but Apple wants to sell as many devices in every category as possible.
I think Apple would love a world where no one uses OS 10 though, because they built OS 10 when it was an open platform, and they added the walled garden, whereas they built iOS from the ground up as a walled garden. And so they have as much control as they want over it.
And I think the garden's going to get a lot more walled with the experiments they're running on the Apple Watch and the Apple TV, where they're controlling the footprint of the app and they're forcing the apps to live in the cloud. You can download it. They're not guaranteeing space on the drive for the app. I think that whole thing is going to get really messy and bite them in the ass.
Yeah.
But
when they do combine the two platforms, it's going to be due to pressure from the outside.
So, Jeremy, when you say you don't think Apple, you think Apple would love for people to stop using Mac OS, you mean Mac OS as it currently exists right now.
Sure.
If they close the garden on Mac OS, then that's fine.
Well, the App Store on OS 10 is closed. I mean, you have to go through them to
step
get on
one.
there. But it's an open platform in that you can download apps from anywhere.
Well, Xcode exists. I mean, Xcode on iOS would allow for a similar thing.
I don't see them being able to close that garden. I just don't see it.
You don't see it? Well, it'll be on Adobe and other app developers to keep on making good programs on Mac OS and desktop-based systems, so that platform doesn't go away.
I don't know. It's also like the irony where he's telling the Daily Telegraph, like, why would you buy any PC? Like, why would you buy a PC anymore? No, really, why would you buy one? Well, to run Premiere because you guys abandoned Final Cut. Well, yeah, I mean, like to run, to have an affordable tool to run any of a number of development tools. Like it's so. I mean, Tim Cook's usually not this disingenuous or self-serving, but I think he was probably also getting irked with the British media or something. But it's like, why would you buy a PC anymore? Well, why would you buy a Macintosh anymore? Why would you buy a MacBook?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, I see a MacBook, I see MacBooks, I see them everywhere, but there's still a lot of reasons to buy a PC.
Until within Apple, in every
Windows PC.
level of their company, from design to marketing to creating the videos they use at their keynotes, unless it's all on iOS and the apps are there, it's never going to change. Like, even within the company, like if you can't build the lathe that builds another lathe, then the iOS device isn't the lathe yet.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to make itself.
But they're going to make cars soon.
But they're going to make cars soon. Hold on. All right, time for another call out to our sponsor. Today, the sponsor for this week's episode of This Only Test, another sponsor, is Casper Mattresses. Obsessively engineered, American-made mattresses at a shockingly fair price. Listen, you spend about a third of your life sleeping, so let's make sure you do it on a good mattress. Casper brings together two comfy technologies together for better nights and brighter days: latex foam and memory foam. So they got just the right amount of sink and just the right bounce no matter how you sleep. And here's the good news. They've got a risk-free trial and return policy. The mattresses are delivered straight to you, and you can try them for 100 days. And if you're not happy, they'll pick them back up. It's pretty neat, and I've been using one for a little bit, and I like it. It's great. It's cool. It comes in a box, and then it actually unfolds out of the packaging. It's $500 for a twin-size mattress and $950 for a king-size mattress, and it's a really good price point compared to industry standards. And now, for listeners of this podcast, you can get $50 toward any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/test and using the offer code TEST, just like this podcast, TEST. Terms and conditions do apply, and let us know if you bought a Casper mattress and how you like it. So thank them for sponsoring this week's episode of This Is Only a Test. And now, on with the show. Hey, when's the last time you guys went to Disneyland?
Okay. February of this year.
1985.
Patrick, are you an anti-Disneyland person?
I don't know that I'm anti-Disneyland, but the last time I went there, it was profoundly unpleasant because of tweens and just being hammered on. And it was like all the downside of the New York City subway system with little of the entertainment, none of the great food. But
You should go again.
I'll go again someday.
You have kids. Come on, don't they want to see Disneyland?
They don't.
Do they know it exists?
They don't really know it exists.
Oh,
I have
that's
in-laws in LA with kids, and they haven't told their kids that it exists yet.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing to tell kids that
Absolutely.
in LA.
Well, it's not, but it's not like it was when we were all 7 or 10, where everybody knew about it and everybody watched like the Disney programming on the
Right.
like. It's not
The
it's
Wonderful
no
World
longer
of Disney every Fridays.
It's no longer this linchpin. Like my boys still don't entirely understand like what the castle that they see at the beginning of the Pixar movies is.
Oh,
and the longer I can keep it that way, the happier everybody is.
I feel you.
Then I understand the commercialization of Disneyland and
Right.
what that represents, and you can be completely against that and also hate crowds.
Yeah, it's mostly about not losing my 3-year-old in a crowd while spending several $100s.
Kids
for-
are never lost. I don't think they've ever haven't lost a kid in a long time.
Well, Disney.
My children. Oh wait, there's one right there.
There's no off season anymore, so
Right.
whenever you go, just go during the week. Do not go on the weekend,
Right.
Yeah.
and try to pick a month that's not crazy.
After the holidays is the best time.
Mm-hmm.
Super Bowl weekend, I think, is a popular time to avoid the crowds.
Or even right after Thanksgiving is supposed to be a good time to go.
Right. But I appreciate the design of Disneyland.
Sure.
The interesting, like how it feels like it really is an enclosed space, not California Adventure, but actually Disneyland Park itself. And also, it's an efficient operation. I gotta be impressed with
Yep.
the logistics. How many people they employ to turn it over every night?
Right.
I mean, the park, all the lights come on when they close the park at like 12 or 1 a.m. A whole team of people come in and clean it so it's brand
Yeah.
new.
If you compare it to Paramount Park or Six Flags, it's a different league. It's,
Yeah.
it's very clean. The food's not bad, and it's pretty friendly. Why are we talking about Disneyland, Norm?
Well, there's a new Star Wars movie coming out, and Disneyland.
What?
I don't know if you knew this, and Disneyland has actually redone a bunch of its rides and park attractions for Star Wars. This is not the new Star Wars Land that's going to come out in several years.
Star Wars Land.
But like they redid Space Mountain to be Hyperspace Mountain.
Dude, when I saw this on Twitter, and this was a real "why wasn't I notified" moment. This happened like 3 days ago, and they've completely redone Tomorrowland in a Star Wars theme.
It's called the Season of the Force.
It's fancy. I mean, if you ride Space Mountain, which is my favorite ride at Disneyland, it goes back to like 1970 something.
Your most favorite or liked tweet of all time is
Me right on
you
the
on
Disney
Space
Point.
Mountain. Yeah.
But now when you ride it, they've changed the soundtrack from that like 70s space rock opera to a Star Wars soundtrack, and you are in an X-wing and you're fighting TIE fighters and Star Destroyers.
Sorry, now I'm hearing the 70s swing version of the Star Wars theme. Like I don't know if you remember that, but now I'm like envisioning like the 70s do over the bad 70s.
I think that would be
do-over.
brilliant. You can watch it. It's on YouTube. People have already shot it from the front car. Now it's
nice.
it's an indoor.
Stabilized?
No, it's an indoor ride, so it's dark most of the
Tested
time.
listeners out there, I want you to go to Disneyland because I'm not
Dude.
going to go this holiday season.
No, you should go.
You should
You have the equipment.
I know.
You have the technology. If you look
bring
around this place,
a DJI Osmo or the Feiyutech stabilized gimbal, use a GoPro
that would be
Hero
awesome.
3 or 4,
Yeah.
turn up the ISO, turn up to low light mode, wide angle, and record Hyperspace Mountain from the front seat.
It's
Do you have
limited.
Do you have a bail bondsman on tap to get them out of Disney jail if they get caught?
Disney
taping
jail's a
the
real thing.
experience?
No, people tape the experience all the time. No selfie sticks, I guess, at Disneyland.
That's
so you
true.
couldn't bring the DJI Osmo. But the stabilized gimbal, the wearable gimbal, mount that on your chest and get the full stabilized roller coaster experience. It never turns you upside down, so I think it's going to work in those 3 axes.
There's also new Star Tours adventures. There's new characters in Jedi training, including somebody from Star Wars Rebels.
And they finally did something with that Innovations Hub that HP sponsored for the longest time.
Oh, did they use that?
They're using it for a museum for the new movies. I think there are actually some cool
Really?
costumes from the new
Museum
movies.
or advertisement?
It was really I think HP sponsored it as a museum,
Because
innovation
I remember
museum.
like the carousel of the future. Like
Yeah.
even out the idea how long it's been since I've been in Disneyland, where it was like looking at stuff that was 20 years outdated when I saw it in like 1985.
They
or
tried to
3.
salvage it a couple years ago by putting the Marvel characters in there and Iron Man's lab and some movie promotion stuff,
Yeah.
but it still wasn't like the best use.
I did see Ibo there.
Ibo?
Isn't that the no?
Yeah.
Is that the dog? No,
Sony
I saw
dog?
the walking robot.
Oh, you're talking about the Honda
Yeah.
Asmo.
Asthma. Thank you. Yeah,
Asthma.
very good.
Yeah.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd go.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going this year.
You can meet Chewbacca.
Chewbacca.
Hey, 17th was the anniversary of the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched that?
I have not. I'm going to put it on. I have a copy, and I'm going to put it on this holiday for a holiday party, but I have not actually seen the original.
I watched
Star
the
Wars.
first half hour. I couldn't believe how boring it was, and I didn't watch the rest of it. But apparently, the whole cast is in it.
The pacing on television was so different.
It's true, but I think people hated it then too. Like it was bad even for 1978.
Well, that was also, when Battle of the Network Stars used to still be going on and all that other horrible stuff.
Yeah.
How many places can we recycle these people we have under contract? And you'll do this, and you'll do this, and you'll do this.
So, of course, there's a new Star Wars movie coming out, and if you're on social media, it's so difficult to avoid any bit of information. I know even the best intentions, people are sharing links from photos behind the scenes. You can see the Stormtrooper helmets, some of the movie props. Wired has a new, their latest issue is all about Star Wars. Their cover and has these big images. I'm trying to avoid as much as possible in the next month or so. Are we 1 month away?
You know where I heard?
We are less than 1
Yeah, we are.
month away from episode 7.
Mhm.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that was this whole thing happened 1 month before that.
Wow. So in the new Wired article, Wired issue, there's an article. It's also online, written by Adam Rogers, who's a friend of Tested, and he does an interview with Kathleen Kennedy and writes about the movie industrial complex, the current blockbuster industrial complex, and his big headline and thesis for the story is you will never see the end of Star Wars. And it's kind of a sad thing that Star Wars is no longer this set of movies as it once was. It's no longer this catalog of the 3 movies. It's no longer just the 6 movies or even the TV shows. It is an ongoing, infinite storyline.
They're going to keep making material until people get bored of it and won't watch it.
Yes, and I don't think people are going to ever get bored of it. And you'll never see, when on your dying breath, you'll never have seen the full Star Wars. It's a universe, trying to bring that universe through money to build a reality.
Yeah.
And it's happened with every franchise, every big blockbuster franchise.
I don't know about that. Not like Star Wars. Star Wars is more than any.
Not like Star Wars is revered. It came at about a time where, because of the in the history of cinema and culture and media and how people watch media, it resonated in a way that no other form of media. It was not Homer's, the Iliad, right? It wasn't the Odyssey. It is a modern myth that, imagine if the Greeks kept on writing myths forever.
Okay.
And there
I'm with
was
you.
no canon,
Yeah.
right? It's crazy to think about. How will these franchises, because we think of them, they are commercial products.
I don't know. I care about the characters I grew up with. I'm sure after this next few movies, that those characters will be, done over. They'll be finished with,
Yeah.
and they'll move on to the next generation's characters. I won't care as much. I'll be okay.
What's really interesting with Star Wars is that while we love the characters and it's more about the universe that people love. And as Lucasfilm and Disney continue to make Star Wars movies and content forever, they're going to tell the story. The prequels are going to tell, there's already KOTOR. There's already 50,000 years in the past.
Right.
They'll tell, they'll fill out the little gaps in a universe, right? Kind of telling it almost in, maybe some of it in real time, some of it won't in real time. Star Wars, the current movies and the new movies, it's all kind of real time. 30 years ago, 30 years now, within that 100-year time frame. With the Marvel movie franchise and superhero movies, it's different because it's less about building out. You can build the breadth of universe or the depth of universe, but they just kind of turn it over and reboot it. And so you can say, okay, for the Batman movies, I love Batman. He's an enduring character, 100 years old. You have this kind of block of the Tim Burton Batmans, the Christopher Nolan Batmans, and now whatever the Zack Snyder Batmans, the comic book Batmans. So it's almost more like myth telling, where you're telling the same story over and over again
About a character.
In new ways. Star Wars is different because it's not going to be about Darth Vader and Luke forever. It's going to be about
Well,
the
they're
whole
basically
universe
turning it into a
characters
genre
forever.
I mean, it's gone from being like this weird little space opera to being this entire. Because you look at the history of Lucas's output, and it's all over the map. And I still want to kick things whenever I think about Jar Jar Binks and all the
Crystal
characters.
Skull.
Oh goodness. Well, I mean, but it's so like his he created this incredible thing, and
But was what he created the universe, or was what he created the story and the characters?
Well, what he created was he got the merchandising rights, and for the first time ever, the merchandising rights were probably worth more than the movie, and that changed like the entire film industry. Probably not for the better, but it is what it is. So that gave him this huge amount of license, and the fact that the movie made ridiculous amounts of money, the first one. So he it's just like, the second one gets better, the third one gets worse, and then he decides finally to do the first three. And we remember why we didn't really like George Lucas as a director after Star Wars for any of a number of reasons.
So my question
with
is,
episode one,
for the people who were there to watch the original Star Wars,
right?
Which you guys were. Is Star Wars enduring, and does Star Wars resonate because of Episode 4 and that story, or is it enduring because of the universe? And so when the universe is expanded, does it feel like a deepening of a connection to Star Wars, or is it dilution?
Well, I mean, the reason the original one worked is it's the journey of the hero, right? This is enduring
with
sort of,
1,000.
I mean, this is enduring basal stuff that goes back, as far as we can remember, sort of oral storytelling.
Yep.
The universe happens to be spectacular because in Lucas's quest to figure out more and more things for Hasbro to put on toy shelves and for kids to fight over, or for parents to beat each other over up to get, he just kept creating more and more characters and more obscure elements. And it's great. Like, everything in the Star Wars universe has a name. Like, and there's no other genre of sci-fi where every single element, except for maybe like, Frank Herbert's crazier offerings, but there's like every single character has this fully developed backstory because, first there was like the movies, and then there was the books and the toys and
that's fantasy.
But it's also Gibson had this idea, this character that he put in called Continuity. And Continuity was the network, the television network, or the virtual experience network. And Continuity is this unbelievably smart artificial intelligence that was constantly like knitting all of the different disparate elements to keep these, whatever these daytime soap operas were, going on forever and continually. And what Disney's trying to do with Star Wars is to create this idea of this continuity, this constantly evolving, moving
Continuity.
Thank you.
I thought it was a special pronunciation.
No, I have a reader's vocabulary. I thought it was bedraggled till I was like 22 years old and embarrassed myself in college. But the bedraggled, not bedraggled, but the whole idea that they can create this permanently evolving universe, which is
a way of creating an alternate universe.
Sure.
Even if it's not spatially and dimensionally real and physics wise,
right?
And the shared consciousness of a culture, it is just as real. If we impart names and story on these things, it is just as real as memories in the past, whether they are physical objects or not. And that's a strong there's a strong connection to that,
Right.
and people really gravitate toward that. It's why continuity and canon are things when people are fans of franchises really attach themselves to.
Yeah.
But it goes back.
Oh, I was gonna say, but that's what's always so frustrating about Marvel. Like, I can't deal with the Marvel comic books anymore because about the time I started to get into started thinking about Marvel comic books again and the stories, they started doing that whole universe reboot thing, and I just remember being like, I know why they did this. This is like smart and lazy and irritating, and I can't deal with them. But the movies are great.
So here's a question: in talking about the Forever franchise, which is what
Right.
this Adam Rogers story is about, whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. The myths that we have created in
'Cause
modern
it's a
pop
business.
culture. One, because it's a business, and
big
because two,
business.
people want it. Right? It wouldn't happen as humans, as natural storytellers. We want to tell those stories, and we like the stories that resonate. And if you look at what Disney owns, which are two of the biggest kind of universes in commercial culture right now,
Frozen and Toy Story.
That's right. Marvel and Star Wars, the way that they're approaching these forever franchises are different. Star Wars is about the continual building
Right.
of a continuity and an alternate reality in the minds of storytellers, and Marvel, it seems like, even with their expanding Marvel universe, is going to be a recycling over time, a renewal of these tropes and these characters, the retelling of Iron Man, the retelling of Batman on the DC side. I don't know which one I like more. I mean, there can be good stories in both, but I almost, my God, I don't know. It's really fascinating. Like
One thing at a time, right?
50 years from now.
Let's let JJ have his time in the spotlight.
Yeah.
I got a good feeling about this film. I'm feeling good about the next one.
It's all a trap.
It is. Your original question about why is this enduring, I think, is a fascinating thing, because this did come out of the Cold War. Like Patrick was saying, nothing like this movie was ever made on several fronts.
Right.
It's interesting that my kids, I don't know about your kids, but my kids are into Star Wars.
Yes.
Like they don't have their Star Wars yet. They've adopted ours. They've inherited ours.
And do they revere the original, the seed of Star Wars, that hero's journey, as what it is, or is that just another piece of the world building, the universe that was created?
Well, I mean, a
exists
3-year-old or
now.
a 7-year-old, because 7-year-old approaches Star Wars radically different from a teenager, which is radically difficult from an adult, which is radically different from somebody who's older, right? But that's the whole point of the hero with 1,000 faces, is that it resonates with you,
With a certain age.
Yeah, the 7-year-old, it's all about the 7-year-old taught the 3-year-old to run around with this little toy broom and go boom because they have blasters, and then, but as a teenager watching it, it's a radically different experience, because it's like, hey, I'm stuck in Snodgrass suburbia and I hate my life, and hey, maybe I'll have a big adventure and go somewhere.
It's something that a storyteller like J.J. Abrams, who grew up, who was seeded with that original Star Wars,
Sure.
and Kasdan, undoubtedly understand, and their success, I think, will be measured by how much the episode 7 characters and story resonate. If 30 years from now, the generation that your kids are, if they feel like their Luke and their Han and their Leia are the characters in this episode 7 new movie, then JJ will have succeeded.
Interesting.
If they feel they still gravitate toward Luke and Darth Vader and Yoda, then I think it's going to be a failure on the franchise's part.
As I told you after Halloween, my kid dressed up as Kylo Ren, and his best friend
Right.
dressed up as Rey.
If and I think that leads. I mean, part of that is marketing,
But
because
my
the
kid
movie
dressed
hasn't
up
come
as
out yet.
Raccoon.
But the hero with 1,000 faces, the 1,000 faces of Star
Sure.
Wars, maybe begins with Luke, and then goes on into infinity with every retelling the story, as opposed to Batman, where it's Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, which I think, for some people, that's a huge success. Like, for some people, if you ask them, who is your Batman? Some people will say Adam West. I love Adam West.
Yeah,
Some will say I grew up with the Tim Burton. That speaks to me.
Michael
the
Keaton.
90s, the Michael Keaton Batman. I love the storytelling, the cinematography of Nolan's Batman. That is a huge success on DC's part. Whenever and there are some Batman interpretations that weren't. No one says George Clooney.
Nobody.
And it's fine. But the fact that you can call out 3 great Batman
Yeah.
Right.
is a testament to not only the character but also the storyteller's ability to renew that character.
The way you're talking about Star Wars is interesting, because when they bought it, when Disney purchased the Star Wars empire, they paid, I forget what it was, but it paled in comparison to what they paid for Pixar.
Yep.
And it was because Pixar is a IP generating machine.
Yep.
And so they figured that they would make, much more money off of that license, off of that ability to have that studio. But the way you're talking about Star Wars, it sounds pretty endless too.
It is, but it's unproven. The IP is unproven.
Right.
Well, it's certainly been proven with nerdly kids in the 1980s buying paperback books, and the toys certainly had a depth that's really kind of rivaled only by maybe Transformers or My Little Ponies. But
It's a depth versus a breadth. Like
Yeah.
when Pixar, when Cars and Inside Out, each itself then can branch into. It's a difference between buying a money-making machine making factory and just one money-making machine.
Well, but I mean, yes and no, because I'll be honest with you, I was blown away. Like, I wasn't expecting a lot.
Do you want to buy the goose that makes golden eggs, or do you want to buy 2 geese that can reproduce and make more geese that makes golden eggs?
Well, I would obviously want the reproducing geese making more and more golden eggs because I'm human and I'm greedy, right? But or I'd just be happy with one golden goose and not slaughtering it to find the gold mine inside. But the thing, I mean, it's curious because Pixar has done an amazing number of hits, but like nobody mentions the Airplane movie that was the spinoff from Cars.
That
Straight
was
to video.
not straight to video, not made by Pixar.
No, I'm thinking about the one before that, but the Planes wasn't made by Pixar.
Nope, not made by Pixar. Disney.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah.
Well, that just makes me so happy. I did not know that.
Come on. Give us another one.
Well, no.
You can talk about the number 1 Pixar fan right here, Jeremy Williams.
Well, it's funny. Like we eat, fairly irregularly, but regularly enough at Rudy's Can't Fail Cafe, and
Oh,
we
love
always
it.
admire the seagull on the corner of the Pixar building. And
Mm-hmm.
we've looped the Pixar building several times because I know someday they're going to put a secret entrance to the ultra cool playground for the kids in the East Bay, but they never do. But there's so many elements there. But the reason I'm going down this particular hole is because they are trying to create something new, right? Because DC's gotten kind of lucky and kind of not lucky, and Marvel's been extraordinarily good about nurturing. Once they figured out that they had this giant money mine in these characters, like they certainly still do the comic books and they care about the comic books, but they unleash this absolute beast in Hollywood that's going after all the eyeballs in all the world, and it's done pretty well with it. And I certainly think that's what they hope to do with Star Wars.
And what I love about what's happening now in the comic book industry and Marvel and DC is, they say, oh, it's so tough to create an enduring character now that resonates. People love Batman. They love Superman. They love Wonder Woman. And those are the ones that, like, how do you create a new Batman? And it's been so tough.
Right.
Well, you know how you create a new Batman? Don't create another angsty billionaire who decides to be a vigilante. Tell more diverse stories. The new heroes in those universes and the new writers who are working on characters are creating new characters. They can be permutations of the old characters, like the new Captain Marvel.
Sure.
But guess a new Spider-Man. But the reason they're enduring, the reason that the new Ultimate Spider-Man is the only character that survived at the death of his universe, Miles Morales, is because he represents not just a white kid in New York, the nerdy kid. We've had a lot of those stories. Let's tell a different story now. And
While
the
still adhering to that power of myth kind of story.
Yes. Yeah, it's 1,000 faces. Got to introduce more of those faces. And that's why it's really resonating. And congrats to the writers for succeeding there. Back to a little bit about technology. There are a couple of teardowns that iFixit. iFixit, of course, the site that they not only sell the tools for you to repair products, but also they do awesome teardowns of tech gear. They did 2 teardowns recently that I think were notable. One, the Fairphone 2. Have you heard about this phone? It's
Nope.
a modular phone, and iFixit gave it a rare 10 out of 10
For fixability?
for fixability and
Oh, wow.
repairability.
They said it couldn't be done.
Yeah. This is an Android phone. It's a Dutch company. It's kind of expensive, but with just a screwdriver, you can take this phone down and replace almost every single part. It's not the Google Aura phone, where the modulability is kind of really plug and play, where you can slide out a module.
Right.
This one does have a chassis. You have to take it out, and the modules do look more like your logic boards, and so you have a better form factor. But almost every part is replaceable.
Which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And in having broken apart a bunch of phones and tablets, it's astonishingly easy to pull apart by
So
a
what?
smartphone.
What are the downsides of it? Is it bulky?
It's a little bulky, bulkier, and it costs.
Snapdragon 801.
It does cost. I think the dream of a fully repairable phone, it's a really admirable goal, but to be pragmatic, I really only want a few things. Like, look at your phone and look at what breaks. Does a microphone break? No, it's the screen.
Have you ever
It's-
gotten the microphone wet?
True. No, and of course it's a long tail issue.
Right.
But I think in terms of, I don't think it's reasonable to ask a major smartphone manufacturer, and of course not Apple, because they'll do whatever the fuck they want, to make a fully modular phone.
I can hear Kyle's teeth grinding all the way in San Luis Obispo. His ears are burning red and his teeth are grinding because you basically. And but it's funny because I've been looking at Dell's Inspiron 7000 759, which is like a $799 gaming laptop, and it's huge.
Yeah.
Right? It's a 15.6 inch screen. It's like an inch thick, and I'm like laughing because it's an inch thick, and it feels like I'm carrying a lunch tray. But it's like the equivalent of a Core i5 with a 750 Ti, and there's actually 2 full SO-DIMM slots, and there's a full-size 2.5-inch hard drive, and there's a
Accessible?
accessible. There's one screw to pop the back off.
Right.
You know,
And accessibility, love it.
Yes.
I think that as opposed to trying to reach that 10 out of 10 repairability score, which you still have to make a business and sell a good phone with good software, it really is to illustrate the fact that we do need phones that have at least batteries are replaceable.
Sure.
Batteries and screens. Those are number one things that I think users want to replace. Do I necessarily want to have the processor upgraded? Maybe it doesn't make the most sense in terms of how the logic and the RAM and memory is all integrated.
You're less concerned about repairability than modularity in those cases. And modularity, I think, you always end up with like an idea and then ends up being this giant,
It's two sides. The modularity, repairability is one.
Right.
And then also upgradability.
Right.
So repairability and upgradability, like battery is the perfect intermediate, right? Battery doesn't necessarily fail. You're not upgrading a battery, but you're basically extending your phone's life because batteries have a limited life recharge span, right? And that, I think, absolutely, I love phones that have replaceable batteries. LG G4. Camera module, I don't need that to be replaceable. I know what I'm getting into when I buy the phone, and it's something that's going to be good enough for the lifespan of the phone. The screen, I think it's great if a screen can be replaceable yourself.
In case it breaks.
Because that's something that it directly affects your everyday use of it. Is a huge part of it, and that's less about upgrading your screen and more about the thing that fails most on phones.
Oh man, if you could just have a screen on your shelf in case your phone broke, fantastic.
Right. So I think for companies out there, if you can make a phone where it's the battery, memory, and screen are replaceable, I think you've got you're in practical
When
sense.
you say memory, you mean
Yeah,
memory?
like extent. Sorry, storage.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I was like,
Storage.
because I was just like, oh wow, because I can think of phones I've had where like another gig would make it function so much better. But
Yeah, I think processor and memory kind of tied together.
I don't know. This is like, I mean, this is the far end of the bell curve for smartphones in one sense, in the idea that they've created this sort of Lego system to snap everything together, which is kind of an insult to Legos. But the fact that it's just a bunch of screws and things pull apart, and you're not sitting there with like giant heating devices to pry the screen off. It would be nice if certainly Apple and Samsung just made it easier to repair screens. But their theory is like, we'd much rather sell you.
That's right.
Well, if you buy the service contract, and then it's $99 for this extended service plan, $79 per replacement when you break your phone, and then we'll take the parts and recycle them into other phones to turn over to other people for $79.
There's also a war for thinner and lighter.
I'm fed up with thinner and lighter.
I think that's their line. Their line is that we can't make the screen replaceable because of the design of the phone, and I think what this phone and a lot of the, it's the challenge of Android and other phone makers to prove that wrong, to make a beautiful and sturdy phone where you can actually pop the screen out, where you don't need customized screws. Come on, like Penelope wasn't because it was necessary. It was a FU to repairability.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is neat. This phone, they don't just make it easy to open or openable. Once you get inside it, there's markers all over the place for how to put it back together.
Yeah.
And where the screws are, they're all circled in blue. There's little icons places. It has designed to open, molded in the side of the phone. It's neat.
It's funny, like in a lot of cases, there's some aspects of this coming on with automotive design, because I was looking at one of the new models of a Subaru, and they've gotten to the point where like the oil filter is at the top of the engine and accessible. You don't even you can basically like you can change the oil filter without actually having to get under the car.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And there's not a whole lot of maintenance other than that, and like changing the spark plugs in 50 or 70,000 miles. If you make those two things relatively accessible, then it gets that much easier to maintain.
If that's possible, I mean, why aren't people doing that everywhere? That sounds fantastic.
Because it requires you to actually think about things and re-engineer things in a way that makes them more accessible for repair, and that's usually the last thing that people are thinking about when they're engineering a new product.
Now, talking about another iFixit teardown, this one with a product that has a repairability score of 1 out of 10.
Who was that?
Repairability
Sorry,
score of
everybody.
1 out of 10. Apple Pencil.
Oh, really? Does
Yeah.
it?
Well, I think it's less interesting that it has a repair. I'm not surprised at all. The Apple Pencil's repairability score of low repairability score, but it's all about this teardown, or it was illuminating how that device works and what the sensors are, and what the logic is on the Apple Pencil. And the two interesting things that came out of this teardown is that there are sensors that detect the angle the pencil is, and also the orientation.
The angle for calligraphy? So that
The angle for how you're writing, yes, and
Yeah.
that determines the pen stroke, and so the stylus is a really interesting device, and in terms of how much technology the modern man and modern engineers have put into a device to emulate a piece of lead. Physics.
Yeah.
Right. You have from the capacitive, which Apple Pencil is not, the capacitive stylus, which just no pressure sensitivity, and you can use software for how fast you're moving the pen to illustrate, to abstract the width of your pen stroke. You have an active stylus, which uses Entrig or Wacom technology with magnetic field or Bluetooth. And then you have a lot of logic both on the reception side and on the transmission side to figure out all these things to kind of approximate basically the physics of writing without actually putting down
You
any
could say
ink.
the same thing for a keyboard emulating a typewriter. Like when that was new,
Sure.
people said this is silly.
Sure. And so every step along the way is really interesting. And
Yes.
of course, while it costs $100 now, and it's way more expensive than a 5-cent nickel pencil, all this will build to how we interface with computers in the future, right? And I still haven't used the Apple Pencil yet, but it's really interesting what Apple has put into it. I really want to see how it compares with the Surface, the Microsoft stylus.
Yeah.
I just wish I could draw better to actually take advantage of either device in a meaningful fashion.
Me too.
Well, your signature is one of the easiest ways to test, because you know how it looks on a pen with pencil, and with different surfaces.
You
Try
can't-
drawing a circle.
You can't justify the cost of the
No.
product just to draw your signature, though.
Absolutely not. Although a good point that you make is that I think that the stylus is really, there's a huge potential for the stylus as a digital accessory, as a device that you carry with you between devices. Touch
No longer
ID.
get yourself filthy by touching the
Well,
screen at the Home Depot.
No,
Oh, you mean
no,
like a key, so it would actually have your identity on it?
I think the way to get people to collaborate
That's interesting.
it isn't about user logins. I think it's about putting your digital signature and your thumbprint on your input, and
Brings
how
us
you
back
interact.
to the whole biometric thing and security. And
Sure, I
what
mean, you can
happens
lose
if
your
I-
stylus.
I
You can
stole
lose it.
Norm's pen.
Right.
We're going to town.
Right.
Yeah.
And right now, the way you're Apple, one of the ways that you're carrying your info is through your watch.
It would
right?
have Touch ID on it, on the pen itself, so that Norm has to be holding it.
So
Like a
Or we
fire-
need
like a
Norm's
firearm.
thumb.
Yeah, that's right.
But, I mean, think about the your Apple Watch, right? The Apple Watch, the way there's no biometric on it. All it has is your passcode, the proximity to your phone, which is one of the way it unlocks, and then the sensor it has is how it's connected to, in knowing that it's on your wrist. Like on or off, which is still like, okay,
Or it's been on a wrist.
It's on a wrist.
since it was activated.
which is a good enough kind of identifier. But the Apple Watch right now is a way that has you can use it to buy stuff. And I'm sure in the future, it's a way for you to kind of identify yourself, like unlock doors and things like that. They want you to use apps that way.
Yeah, you can do that at hotels at W, I think.
Exactly. The watch is one way to, but there's nothing else. It's kind of like a passive identifier. It's a name tag for you, right? But you can't do things with it. The stylus, the pen, the pencil is something it's built to do things.
Gives you agency in the world.
In the pointing device. It's a cursor. It's a you can use it to tap things. So I think both on Microsoft's side and on Apple's side, I think they see huge future potential for what the stylus can be and is. Adobe, I think, had their stylus, which was tied to your Adobe account. So think of it this way: if you're in their app and you held their stylus, which has your account, when you click a button and you cursor over the app, it loads in your sketches and your database and your settings. But that only work within their app.
Yeah.
If you own the ecosystem and you own the platform, you own the OS, I could totally see the Apple Pencil or the Microsoft Stylus being that powerful.
Is it the mouse replacement 15 years from now?
I think it could be.
If Xerox PARC could have made a touchscreen, would they have done a pencil instead of a mouse?
It's 1-to-1. 1-to-1 tracking the movement. All to complement other modals of interaction, of course. Touch and keyboard and cursor.
Right.
I don't think any of that stuff's going to go away.
No,
Are
soon.
we running short on time? How are we doing? You guys doing okay?
I have no heart out.
Let's continue talking. Did you guys see? Obviously, the iPad Pro's out. Surface Book is out. DisplayMate, who does Dr. Ray Sanera, I believe, he does this incredibly detailed analysis of displays.
I'll say.
Every device. DisplayMate sells calibration software, but to sell that software, he then runs new devices through a rigorous testing, and his reports are kind of held really high. Like the tech community really like holds them up high, and it's really interesting if you dive deeper into his tests, what he's testing for. I think a lot of people look at his results and say, okay, iPad Pro, great. But not as great as maybe the Surface Pro 4 or something, or our iPad Mini 4 was like the biggest surprise. It's a great display, 99% sRGB and uniform backlight. Like I think you really have to dig into it to figure out what matters to you.
Yeah.
Just because he's saying that the iPad Pro isn't as good as the Surface Book display, I think they're both pretty good.
Well, this is also, this is as weird as like what does anything actually sound like as a question, and all audio being something it's reconstituted at so many levels, from the initial choice of microphones to the speakers and everything in between. Nobody knows what anything looks like on a television computer.
That's right.
Or a television screen or a computer or a projection screen unless it's been calibrated. And even within the context of calibration, you still have issues with color fidelity. And it's funny because when you're selling HD TVs, they artificially manipulate the color to make it pop, to make it entirely too bright, so it doesn't fade in the background with all the other ones on the racks. And it's so amazing because you start getting, there's so many layers and subtleties within the recreation of color on a screen. It's kind of mind altering. It's just crazy when you start realizing like, well, this one looks better than that one, and this is why. And it's like, the color gamut. There's too much blue in the color gamut. It's like, holy crap.
Well, and you put two great displays next to each other and really notice one's warmer and one's cooler.
Yeah,
I
but
think,
if you don't put
if
them
you
beside
don't,
each other,
they both look great.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at displays in general, because displays are obviously important, they're how we interact with the digital content. You look for accuracy, which I think what you're talking about, accuracy being really, really difficult to gauge and also evaluate, and also to gauge whether it matters or not. And two, what I think what's more important is just basic functionality, evenness of backlight, how bright it actually gets.
Right.
These are things that you can absolutely you'll actually affect your day-to-day experience if a screen does not get bright enough in the sunlight. If there's uneven backlight, you could see backlight bleed in a nighttime environment. Like,
Right.
these are things actual, just basic. And I think we've gotten to a point where most of the high-end displays meet those requirements. You know how close to the screen the panel is to the glass, whether it's recessed or not. I think that affects this basic usability. But in terms of accuracy, the difference between 99% RGB and 99% Adobe RGB, I think matters so little to 90% of the users.
It's diminishing returns again.
It is.
We've gotten to the point now where technology is so good that the amazing technical achievements that people are making don't matter to 99% of the people.
And it really is that 5% that these tests are speaking for. And I don't want to discount them, because I asked on Twitter, who do people actually print out what they see on their iPad? When's the last time you edited an image, like a raw image, with a Lightroom on your laptop or your tablet, not your laptop, and then sent it to a printer to print out, and then cared about the accuracy of that? And I know, Jeremy, you said you have a printer that you can print out, but do you care about the 5% difference in color accuracy?
No. I mean, I don't even know. For my purposes, it's for my kids anyway. They don't care.
I think there is a fair point that some people, professionals, and for businesses, someone pointed out, it does matter when you look at, for example, Home Depot's website, and you look at paint swatches, and you need the color on the screen to be close to what it actually is in person.
Well,
then yes.
There's a reason, like in iPads, there's no ability for you to be like, oh, I want to boost the contrast, or I want to boost the, manipulate the colors. Because it's like the number of times I've walked into somebody's, office and been like, that looks wrong, and then realize that they've tweaked the color to their satisfaction.
Their satisfaction.
Well, we worked at magazines, and they would attach an octopus suction cup to the monitors.
Yes.
And it would run its own calibration functions to get the colors as accurate as possible.
Yes.
I mean, it's not their satisfaction. It's to meet some sort of standard
For a production environment, absolutely. But what I'm saying is these kind of mobile or consumer class devices, 95% of the people, bullshit number I'm throwing out there, the vast majority of people who are buying these devices, it doesn't matter. Now, for a device that's like the iPad Pro, where it's positioned to be for an artist, where maybe they're going to use the Apple Pencil and design on that and then port over to their desktop, maybe that matters. Yes, a little more.
Well, I mean, it's also when you start looking at like the difference between a $100 tablet and a $500 tablet, the place it is almost immediately obvious is in looking at the screen, the quality of the screen, the brightness of the screen, the color of the screen, the color saturation, the pixels per inch. And in that sense, I think certainly at Apple, the goal is for the iPads, all of the iPads, period, to be the best possible screen they can deliver.
And be consistent.
Because
in their dream world, you're designing on an iPad and viewing on an iPod or an iPhone, and designing on a 4K, 5K iMac, and then viewing on the iPad. As long as it's consistent between those devices, people are happy. Because really, just all it matters is how you're viewing it in the end, whether it's paint on your walls, a printout on a magazine, the print quality on a magazine, or viewing a video in YouTube.
I don't know. They're not catering to the professionals these days, though.
But I think it's more of a personal pride issue. I mean, it's like we are just going to we are going to charge a lot for these, and as part of that, we are going to deliver this superior experience, because it all comes down to looking at the the colors coming off of the screen. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because the iPad Mini 4, is close to being a textbook perfect LCD display in all of the lab measurements and viewing tests. And it's like there's probably some really happy engineers inside of Apple as a result of that. Yeah.
Well, they probably knew it. They're glad someone else noticed.
Yeah. But it's, that whole, I don't know. I mean, they probably could charge less for these products at Apple if they did not spend as much money on the screens. But I don't think that's going to happen. That's always been something that they have prided themselves on.
The premium experience overall.
Yeah. I mean, they basically came up with the Retina display or the 5K Max. Like, nobody needs a 5K Max unless you're a psychotic Photoshop, jockey, thin line. But, or if you're one of those people who's like an extreme coder and is operating with 7 windows simultaneously. But, Apple has never had any issues with absolutely pushing the high end on screen technology. And they're doing it in a way that it makes them compliant within an industry.
And it is one of the few places where they really chase a spec. even if they're not advertising it,
Yeah.
and they don't tell you, but they do. I mean, they tell you PPI in
Yeah.
their keynotes, and then they'll in their videos show the subpixels of their 5K screen and talk about those specs.
Yeah.
Anyway. We are going to be running a little short on time, so I'm going to go through the next bit of tech news, and we'll talk a little bit about each, but then race toward the VR minute. Google Search has started. They've been indexing the content within mobile apps for a long time on Android, and what's really cool is search on Android now. You can search, and you'll get results from within apps, and when you click the result, if the app isn't actually in your phone, it will stream the virtual machine of that app, a VM version of that app, to your phone.
What?
And you can interface with it.
Any app on the Google Play Store?
Not every app.
Oh, every
yet.
app that complies to their SDK?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of content within apps, media content, news apps, whatever, search stuff. But the idea that they're confident enough on the virtual machines and their platform.
It's a
and
lot of virtual
experience,
machines to spin up.
They have a lot of processing power.
Well, yeah. They also have a lot of users.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting.
I mean, it speaks to the value of what information is actually in apps only today and not indexed on web pages. I mean, it's a necessary move for Google. I mean, Google Search they pride Google Search because it indexes the world's information, but as it exists on HTML and not necessarily, and of course, dynamically generated pages and stuff like that. But there's a lot of content now solely in an app. And so I need to be able to index that content too, and then also deliver that experience to users seamlessly within the search results.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, big deal, I think. May not impact you today, but it's an investment in their future. We've been using Steam Link a little bit, Steam OS, getting their daily updates. I think Ars Technica did a benchmark test and showed that on the native Steam OS systems, performance is a little bit slower than you would get on a desktop, on a x86 machine, or a Windows machine, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not to be confused with Steam Link.
No, I'm sorry. It's Steam OS, like the Alienware boxes, things
Right.
running Linux. It's a driver issue. I'm not that surprised right now.
No.
Intel? Intel on the high-end consumer side, which is their E-class processors. Right now, the highest end, I believe, is still the Haswell E with 8 cores. These are basically the server chips that they then eventually remarket and redesign for the high-end gaming market, or high-end prosumer market for gamers and for people running video encoding, for example. Rumor is that Broadwell E could have 10 cores. Adding 2 more cores, that means 20 with hyper-threading. That's a lot of cores. I could always use more.
But running at a slower speed, so there's distinct trade-offs for this.
Patrick, you do a lot of production encoding. Do you find that apps benefit more cores or clock speed?
It depends on the app. Depends on how effectively it's threaded.
The general, like the state of apps today.
I at some point, once you get up to 8 cores, it starts getting interesting, because a lot of times when you get more, or when you get up to 4 cores, 8 threads, when you get larger than that, it starts getting really shifty, which is a really half-assed answer, but it really depends on how hard you can actually push each individual thread and how good your cooling is.
Right. There's overhead when you're going to split that up, and not many apps aren't even optimized to take more than 2 cores right now, because that's where the majority of users are.
Yeah, I mean, and then when you start looking at turbo mode, it really becomes, cooling is actually starting to become something that's really useful if you can overclock things, which brings us down to speed. But if you have too many threads running and the processor gets too hot, then you lower the speed the threads can run at, and you lose the advantage of the extra cores.
Yep.
So it's a little frustrating.
A Kickstarter I want to call out, Tiny Circuits, which I don't actually have it on the set right now. We did a video about their miniature arcade cabinet a while ago. This is a stackable Arduino-compatible microcontroller. And
A component set.
It's stackable, which is what makes it really compact. They just launched a Kickstarter for that arcade cabinet, which they're selling an acrylic model and a wood model you can snap together. It doesn't look exactly like what I showed earlier this year, but they do have that 3D printed one. for I believe $150. If you want the acrylic one with all the electronics, it's $60. I think it's really neat, and the games are playable.
Yeah. They're all original. They're not original games, but they're
inspired by
actual games, and they're all coded for this platform.
Yes. Speaking about coding, Microsoft has launched a new initiative to teach kids to code with Minecraft. Code.org did a Star Wars theme one, and now
Yeah, I meant to mention that last week. That's very cool. I love code.org. It's
so
great.
explain what they do and how you and your kids have used it.
There's basically code blocks that you don't have to do any typing. So you drag out, very simple commands like move right, move left, or, you can create basic if statements, and they're all just drag and drop blocks that you arrange that would look like, C code or JavaScript or something like that. But the user doesn't have to do any typing. So it's the perfect introduction just to logic. And so code.org, they partnered with Lucasfilm or Disney, and they made basically a Star Wars game that has to be a puzzle game that has to be solved by dragging out code blocks. And then they introduced typing, so you no longer drag and drop, but you actually start typing like move right, and then you have to do like 2 parentheses and a semicolon. So it just introduces real basic coding concepts to beginners, and it's absolutely brilliant. I love seeing my kids use it.
It's like that equivalent. When I was growing up, the program we used was that logo, drawing the turtle. Do you remember that? Where you do the command line instructions, walk the turtle forward, turn left, and it was basically an etch-a-sketch with the keyboard. And I would, on paper, write out like lines of, okay, I want to, how many lines could I draw out of the code, quote unquote, press enter and have it draw me a house or something. Right. And this is like the modern equivalent of that with drag and drop, better interface, and then incorporating now Star Wars and Minecraft to really get the kids interested.
What's the Minecraft version of this?
So there is a Minecraft one. It's a tutorial, and it has basic movements like move forward, turn left, and it's using the Minecraft visual interface, like Minecraft as a way to the character and the world.
That's funny. We've been using Scratch to teach Seamus.
Yeah, that's the MIT. That's where it all started. I think that they basically invented this, as far as I know. It's fantastic.
And then there's a cool video Ford put out that they're actually testing their autonomous cars. They built a little fake town that they use to test it. Have you seen on city streets any autonomous cars? Every time you see the LiDAR.
Have you?
I've seen one.
Autonomous cars?
Well, not without people in the driver's seat.
I haven't seen
still
them
people
without the
there.
driver's seat. I have seen the autonomous cars twice.
Yeah.
The early Apple version, or the early
Google
versions that were the modified Volkswagens. I haven't seen any in the last probably 2 or 3 years.
Here in San Francisco or down South Bay?
I saw one in the East Bay on 880, I want to say, and one probably on the peninsula.
I didn't know that they could drive outside of their periphery.
I thought they were cleared for the whole state.
It's interesting.
Well, they could also be mapping.
Yeah.
And they maybe aren't actually being driven autonomously.
Right.
But they're testing the mapping in a city environment while a human driver is driving.
I saw one autonomous car got pulled over a week ago for driving too slow. It was like driving 20 in a 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Living in the future. Anyway, it's time for... Yeah.
No, they put it on the...
Yeah.
Yep.
Hold on. VR Minute. And here's the VR Minute.
Okay, Norm, you go.
That's an outro or intro I pulled from an old email. I can't find the VR Minute intro.
I'll make you one.
Please make me one, Jeremy. I think one of you guys out there sent one in, but the file did not have an audio extension, so I thought it was a virus. So I didn't play that one. So that's a really old one that someone made, but we wanted to have an intro for the VR Minute because we have not had one in our past 2 NASA launches.
You go, Norm.
So Altspace VR announced a partnership with Wizards of the Coast to launch D&D. That's Dungeons and Dragons.
I remember.
In virtual reality.
I've never played Dungeons and Dragons.
Me neither.
Really?
It's a time to do it in VR. It actually might make me interested in playing D&D.
I've always been interested. I've just never had a crew that was nerdy enough.
I've known plenty of crew. I have housemates.
I want that crew. I want it desperately. I want to try D&D, so maybe this is my opportunity.
You need a good DM. I think that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
So Altspace VR is a social VR company where they create events and create virtual spaces, and people can wear their headsets and enter basically virtual chat rooms and watch shared media. And they created this tavern that you could create an avatar, go inside, and play a D&D game.
Is it-
roll die, and
That's it.
there's a table.
It's a tabletop simulator.
It's a tabletop simulator.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can boot up an instance of it and then generate your map as you would for D&D, draw out
Yeah.
your board, and then start a server and people can jump in and play. I haven't done it yet. I don't know how interested actual D&D players are in it. I don't know how VR enthusiasts, and they think it's cool, but whether they're actually playing in it and using it, and whether it's going to be more than just a novelty. But it's like Ready Player One. Here goes your game room.
Carmack is supposed to be a legendary DM. Apparently, he led a campaign back in the Doom days for the old id Software, and it went on for like months and months and months.
Wow.
Yeah. I would put money into a benefit. Like if he wanted to auction off a night of D&D with him as the DM inside this virtual space, I bet they could raise mad money.
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide if like I'm brave enough to go into a virtual world with Carmack.
Yeah. You'll remember it forever.
I'll follow him into whatever metaverse he wants to lead me into, even if it ends up in a D&D game. And then also another piece of the VR minute. Will wrote a piece for Wired.
I saw that.
Did you see this?
An
You read
op-ed.
this? An op-ed for Wired, Wired.com, proclaiming 360 video not being VR. Now, this is something that like Chet Falasek has talked about at length. That's a Valve, Steam VR. People promoting room scale VR. There are a lot of content makers out there who are making 360 video or 360. It's rotational tracked, quote unquote VR experiences. We'll just call them virtual reality experiences, whether they're pictures or movies or interactive or games. But it's different than positionally tracked experiences, and then also room scale, sitting and standing. And Will's point is that don't call what Google's doing with 360 video VR. Call it 360 video because you can view it on a phone.
Yeah, I think his motive is to tell people that if they have tried this, because New York Times just distributed a million cardboards inside the Sunday Times, right?
That's right.
So a lot of people have just tried VR for the first time on cardboard, which is like the bare minimum as far as the VR experience goes, and it probably caused a little bit of nausea in a certain percentage of those people. And Will's priority is to tell those people, if you didn't enjoy that experience, don't give up hope.
Yeah.
Right.
I am totally a fan of 360 video experiences viewed in VR. 360 pictures viewed in VR. I think they're great. I want to encourage what companies like Jaunt are doing in experimenting with content, whether it's a full 360 or 180 degrees. Basically, I think video doesn't need to be 360. I think video you can take a rotationally tracked or VR headset and view basically an IMAX experience. I just want a bigger canvas, right? I don't need to turn my head all the way around. And I want to see films filmed that way. And you got to get the stitching right. You got to get the workflow right. Computational power, it's still not on the local side, it's still on the server side, and that stuff needs to be figured out.
Yeah.
Yes, it's hugely different than maybe experience you get with a modeled 3D space, and it's like the difference between filming a movie and rendering a movie.
Yes. You got to admit the new Lightro camera looks pretty amazing.
Yeah, if they can get it right.
That's the light field capture device, which
has depth information.
it's not like a camera in the traditional sense. It will give you parallax in both horizontal and vertical.
That's right.
So that you can move side to side, but you can also do some positional movement. So you can
Yes.
move in that space.
And I think that's for comfort. It's not. I think I agree that you don't want to sell that captured experience as a world you can move in.
Right, because there are
Metaverse,
limits.
Because there are absolute limits. I think any type of parallax you integrate and any type of like depth information
Yes.
Is really for comfort of viewing a piece of content that you're supposed to enjoy in stationary position or in a rotational position.
Right, but if you have that information, you can now tilt your head side to side, and you can move around within a certain range. So
I would still call that VR. It's still if you're putting on a headset to view it. I mean, to some extent, I don't think you could call even the room scale stuff VR. I mean, it's all a sliding scale. 20 years from now, when we figure out locomotion and you have big warehouses with positionally tracked, and you can walk in big rooms,
full field of
view.
Yeah.
You wouldn't call Steam VR and Oculus. You wouldn't call that VR either. You say, those
Early days.
early days of room scale. We got to get there. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
It's a big progression. But the people who did put on and I think some people did who put on the New York Times the glass stuff, and I would say for the people I've showed cardboard to, more often than not they are impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it serves a purpose. I think it would be, I think they have a classroom initiative so that schools can buy them in bulk, and why not? I mean, if you can put cardboard into the hands of 30 kids in a public school and get them just to look around and see a different space for the first time, that's fantastic.
And it's about creating scalable experiences. I think the content creators should create something, maybe aim for the high end and create something that's going to be room scale or beyond, but then allow the content to pare down so you can view it in just a rotational stationary experience and have still a good experience that is better than looking at a rectangle on your desk.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going to get there.
Leaves an impression.
Yes. And that does it for the VR Minute. Let's wrap up with some stuff we're testing. What have you guys been testing this week?
Man, Dell's 7559, that gaming laptop, which is a pretty impressive for $799. And the fact that you can actually get inside of it and get to most of the upgradable innards with a single screwdriver and a single screw is pretty awesome. It's also funny because I'm so used to like, oh my goodness, I want newer and lighter and tinier, and the Surface Pro 4 is 2.5 pounds. Well, this is like a 5-pound laptop with a big old power brick. But I also look at it like, if it would just do 32 gigabytes, this would be such an amazing Premiere editing computer. And it's like, well, you know what? Even with 16 gigabytes, it would still make a pretty badass Premiere video editing computer. So,
Jeremy?
I recently upgraded my NAS box. I have an old QNAP, like 5-year-old Intel Atom-based one that I upgraded to a new one. And it runs virtual machines. I mean, it's amazing what the NAS boxes do now. You can spin up a bunch of virtual machines that has, can support like 40 security cameras, which is the reason I upgraded it. But it's very cool. It's the new QNAP TS439, I think. Good price, and you can rip out your old drives and drop them in the new one, and it just works. That was exciting.
That's
to me,
huge.
because I did not want to buy 4 new drives and go through a copy process.
Copying
So that was great.
from spinning drives to spinning drives.
Yeah, no good. And
No
I've been
good.
playing Star Wars Battlefront.
How do you like it?
I mean, I don't know how people manage to play it because I just want to look at that game.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to walk through it and just admire it. It is the best looking game I've ever seen. And
Really?
prior to absolutely. Prior to this, it was GTA 5, but this takes the cake. I mean, it's just unbelievable. You just want to walk up to everything, just like the X-wings that have crashed into the ground, the textures on the Hoth-like ice planet.
Well,
The Endor planet, when you walk through the jungle, it's just so lush. It's really, really impressive. But I'm horrible at the game. I used to be really good at shooters. But
Are you playing with a gamepad? Is that the problem?
no, I switched to mouse because I get a little bit of an advantage. But
Are you playing on PC?
Yeah.
Let's play together because
sure.
I have it. It has the friend system.
Yeah.
It's made by Dice. It's not like a big party system. It's really just like you and one other person can spawn next to each other.
Great.
So let's play that. I still am exploring the levels. I love the fresh feeling of loading up a new really cool world, a shooter where I like the world,
Yeah.
and discovering the levels. Because not knowing where the limitations are, and the game doing a good job of hiding the seams, is fun.
Yeah. I don't know. I come from Quake, where everyone spawns with the exact same weapons and everyone's happy, and that's my heritage, and I like that. I guess this is supposed to be a simplified version of Battlefield, but I never really got into those games too much. I'm playing this because it's Star Wars, but it seems odd to me that the more you play, the better weapons you get, so that if you're new to the game, you're at a disadvantage.
I think better is relative. I think even with the blaster you get at the start, it's a laser hose. The game is really simple in terms of its shooting mechanics. You're just holding down the laser until it overheats. The weapons you're unlocking, excuse me, really just trade off accuracy, damage per second, and reload times. And
Okay.
So it's really for people who want to snipe, for example, or like shooting from afar versus close quarters. And then the unlocks really are what hamper you in terms of unlocking the.
You don't even have grenades at first.
Thermal detonators and stuff like that, and things you got to unlock. But you can still get kills with, you got it by just playing, and I'm having fun. The thing that I find most frustrating in that game so far is flying the ships.
Oh, I switched to gamepad for that.
mouse and
Interesting.
keyboard's so tough for flying the ships. I know they do a really good job trading off between speed and accuracy. The faster you fly, the more the looser your
Yeah.
controls are, and the less accurate you can be. But maybe it's a good idea. I'll plug in a gamepad.
Also, my kids and I are hooked on Towerfall Ascension. Have you played that at
No,
all?
I haven't.
It's one of these 4-player, last man standing games where you just get pixelated characters on the screen and everybody fights. But it's a arrow. It's a archery